Hey, welcome to the Starfish in the Church podcast, episode 2. We are so glad you're here. I'm Rob Wegner. Hey, a Starfish leader is one who unlocks the collective strength, intelligence, and influence of every leader and every team in their influence. Starfish leaders see family trees, not org charts, with themselves on top. And today is a conversation with myself, Lance Ford, and Alan Hirsch on our new book, The Starfish and the Spirit. So this podcast is a companion to that book. And here's why we've written it. The weight of top-down, disempowering, highly centralized leadership is crushing the church. It's burning out leaders, and it's actually increasing cynicism among those who are outside the faith. And it's time to rediscover a form of leadership that actually unleashes joy, builds community, lightens the burden, equips everyone, and unlocks multiplication. So this conversation actually spanned the globe. And so Alan's audio gets a little wonky a couple times. So our apologies in advance, but it's worth it. Enjoy it. And hey, after this conversation, I've got a little invitation for you at the end with some benefits. So hang on and I'll catch you at the end of the episode.
Okay, Rob Wegner, Lance Ford, and our Uncle Alan Hirsch, the beautiful Alan Hirsch. We're all together here to have a conversation about a book that actually I reeled both of you guys in on, that is titled The Starfish and the Spirit. And
hey, you got the title right. Good job.
I know I got the title right. It's always handy when you get the title right. Well, we've got the Starfish and the Spider running around. You got the Starfish in the Church podcast. So it can get a little, it can get a little confusing, even for those of us that are in the midst of it and have authored it. But anyway, this book, this conversation has been a long-going project that started probably 5 years ago, I'm thinking, if I remember right. Well, actually, it was at least 5 years ago, and through a myriad of bumps and scathing experiences and just all kinds of stuff that hit. The crazy thing about it, and even the frustration, and we've all written, we actually counted up today, Alan. There's 27 books represented between the three of us, which is pretty wild. Yeah, exactly. But this has been the most frustrating one because it's taken so long, and usually it doesn't take that long. But I think that we all agree that the timing of the book coming out here in the spring of 2021 could not have been better. We feel, for several reasons that we'll get to here in a few moments, that the timing is right for the book. Rob, why don't you just kind of explain the premise of the book, the metaphors and all that?
Well, I got to be a part of, by God's grace, this amazing disciple-making movement that was unfolding in India that ended up involving literally hundreds of thousands of new disciples trying to understand what's happening, because I was a part of this mega church back in Indiana. And there was two books that sort of unlocked what was going on for me. One was Alan's book, The Forgotten Ways, which came out when, Al? What year was it? 2000?
2003. Oh, 2006. 2006.
Yeah, 2006. I thought it was 2006. And at the same time, another book came out that was called The Starfish and the Spider. The Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations was the subtitle. And I felt that between Alan's book, and Alan's sort of a phenomenologist explaining how is it the church becomes a movement. And Forgotten Ways has 6 MDNA or elements. When they're mixed together, the church goes kaboom. And then Ori's book was focused on what is the form of leadership that needs to be present for a decentralized movement. And the primary metaphor is that there's 2 types of organizations, a spider and a starfish. So spiders and starfish, they look kind of similar. They both have central bodies with legs that sprout radially from the center, but there's huge differences. If you cut off the head of a spider, you've killed the entire organism. It's dead. And spider organizations, by extension, are standard hierarchies with a central brain. And the body is regulated by this brain or this head. And if something bad happens to the head, the organization dies. It's standard hierarchical leadership. Whereas the starfish, you don't have that problem. If you cut off an arm of a starfish and fling each two parts to the opposite part of the ocean, you end up with two starfish. Starfish has everything it needs in each of its cells to regenerate the whole. So a starfish organization, it has everything it needs in each part of it to reproduce. And Alan's premise in Forgotten Ways is, in Christ in you, hope of glory. There's the seed in every disciple of Jesus to actually be a movement of disciple making, just like inside the seed is the forest. And that's the driving metaphor, is that God's called us to be a starfish movement. The church was designed from the very beginning to be a starfish movement of reproducing disciples and leaders and micro churches and networks, filling cities and regions with the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus.
So we basically took these two huge ideas and we kind of melded them together, and we're going to get Alan to speak on that in just a second. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I want to set this up, Alan, actually I was on a call today with a pastor who pastors a mega church in Alabama, and he read the manuscript of the Starfish and the Spirit, and he told me that back in 2006, he said, I read 2 books. Get this, in light of what Rob just said. He said, I read The Forgotten Ways, and it absolutely just, wrecked my world in a good way. He said, and then I read The Starfish and the Spider, and that turned my thinking of leadership upside down. And he said, I thought, man, if somebody could just bring these two together and show us how to live it out, man, that would really be helpful. So I thought that was pretty amazing. So Alan, in light of that, could you kind of talk about how these two ideas together can be a helpful tool for leaders to really reimagine the way that we're doing church?
It's interesting, and Rob and I chatted about this many, many years ago about the power of metaphors. And what a metaphor does, it enables you to see a certain way of seeing something through the eyes of the metaphor that you couldn't see in another way. So, if I say the church is a seed, it's a whole lot of fertility in that. I mean, the idea of seeds are this little potent little thing that everything's contained in, that the whole thing can be birthed out of a seed. If I say a church is an elephant, well, you get a certain angle on that, and it's each of them is legitimate. So all to say that the idea of the starfish, which I wish I had as a metaphor when I actually wrote The Forgotten Ways. I think I wrote it into a second edition, but I used the idea of Al-Qaeda as being almost unstoppable, because you can't shoot an idea, and it's so decentralized, and that was very real at the time. 2006, there was all that kind of blather about Al-Qaeda. But its organization is very much a starfish type of organization. And it's very, very hard to take out. Actually, guys, another metaphor I came across recently, which will just enhance this, right? Very similar, is this idea of an immortal, they call it the immortal jellyfish. And this is an organism that, when it's threatened, or it finds itself in a crisis or in a hostile environment, it's able to go through a reverse kind of metamorphosis, and it returns to its larva state. It kind of just falls to the ocean of the floor, and then begins to produce this polyp colony of jellyfish, which turns out, literally thousands more jellyfish. Under threat, it just turns into this blob that kind of creates new jellyfish. Wow. And I think there's the metaphor for us. The same idea is that nature always maximizes its chance of survival by investing in seeds, not in centralizing, because as we said, the spider is very vulnerable. So it's a very, very powerful metaphor, the jellyfish one, and the starfish one.
Well, that's going to be the next book. Will be The Jellyfish and the Spirit. So we'll start working on that'll be the follow-up volume.
I'm curious, guys. So, with the current realities of the pandemic, why is this starfish mentality and approach and model so compelling, in your opinion? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, it's forced us into, and Alan talks a lot about this in the Forgotten Ways. It really has forced us into a place of liminality, to a place of an adapt or die scenario, where if we don't change, we're not going to exist. And that's been something that there's been a lot of options on the way to be church or do church that's been on the table for a few years. Well, those options have shrunk in light of the pandemic. And it's one of those deals that we're not going to rehydrate totally. We're not going back to the way it was. And so I know that you guys talk to pastors and leaders all the time, as well as I do. And that's pretty much the consensus. Everybody agrees that this is a change. This is a permanent change. And it's not such a bad thing, I think. I see the hand of the Lord in it. Yeah. I think of the Hebrew scripture that talks about that the Lord will shake everything that can be shaken, so the things that can't be shaken will remain. And I think that's what we're seeing. So we're having to learn to do church in a different way. And the things that Alan was writing about 15 years ago, and about a more decentralized and spread out and sent out church. And you talk about the church in China, you talk about the very situations, not because of persecution that the American and the Western church has found itself in, but still a similar situation that's causing us that we can't be reliant upon big buildings. We can't be reliant upon huge budgets and these things. We have to be more nimble. And that's what a starfish is. And it's reproducible into movements. And a lot of discoveries that we've had in the research for this book and just in our experiences and everything are showing that the church is well equipped to do that and well equipped to be that if we go back to the ancient ways. And, we live them out now.
Yeah. So, I think Lance is quite correct. I think we are now, whether we like it or not, I mean, we've been working very hard the last 20, 25 years, I'm the oldest here, but to try and get the church into a dispersed modality and how does into reproducible and dispersed kind of, forms of church. Well, it's been very, very hard because even people like the idea of it. The whole system that they often leading is kind of built around a completely different understanding of the church. So the healing metaphor is fundamentally different. It's the institutional metaphor, right? And right now we're seeing how incredibly fragile that institution really is. It can't even, survive a few, months of, non-event. Like it's very, very fragile. And so there's now all of a sudden this newfound interest in dispersed forms of church, micro church, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an initial movement moment. I mean, everyone's now saying, so that's what they were talking about. I'm not saying it's, but I think God has shown us something. We have to see God's hand in this. I recently, so one of the things, guys, I think, one of the challenges, and I think we all agree with this, is that helping people to understand what they're seeing is actually a form of church. Actually, it's the most original form. I have a little theory, like if we could get a time machine and take, any senior pastor of a mega church and say, okay, what you know about church now, what do you think about church? We're going to beam you back to our year 200. We're going to go back to year 200, and we want you to go do some research. What is God doing there? What's happening in the churches based on what you understand of church? And then we're going to beam you back, and then you're going to give us a report. It's going to be unique, and we're going to publish it. It's going to be fantastic, right? The guy's going to come back and say, I didn't see anything. God's not doing anything. There's no churches there. Why? Because it doesn't fit the criteria. We don't know what we're looking at. Whereas in actual fact, there was a lot going on. It just doesn't look like church as we know it. We've just come to assume that our form of church is the biblical form. It's not. It wasn't the original form.
Well said.
It's a form of church. It's not that God wasn't in it, but it's only a form, a singular expression. The more original one, and the more dynamic, and the more movementally powerful one is definitely what we're seeing now as the dispersed form, or what we say starfish form. Yeah.
It strikes me as I've watched churches respond to COVID, the the two responses that seemed to pop to the surface immediately. One was we have to pivot and get our services online. So there's this massive shift to the digital space. And I'm all for the church's voice being heard in the digital space. I want God's
Definitely
people, as missionaries in that space. The second one was let's regather, but we have to do it with social distancing. And that's been going on for months and months now. And the stats on both of those are really not encouraging. Like Barna is saying, like 30% of the people that were actively engaged in quote unquote church before COVID have just completely disappeared, like no contact at all. And then churches that are regathering, they're averaging like 20 to 30%. The pivot that I think you're talking about is, what if we reimagine the church as a decentralized network? So you have micro expressions of the church in some nascent form already. You might call it small groups. How can we begin to say, how does the center begin to equip and strengthen those micro expressions of the church? How do we begin to see the church as, first of all, a network of reproducing disciples? And if they do reproduce disciples, then that network becomes a micro expression of the church. And then we can have micro expressions of the church that begin to multiply, and they can begin to form nodes or collectives or networks and work together in the part of a city or an affinity group. I mean, that's how we've reorganized in the Kansas City Underground. We don't plant micro churches. We equip ordinary people to live as missionary disciple makers. They make new disciples in a new context. A micro church emerges. Then micro churches begin to emerge in a particular geography or affinity group, and we form them into what we call a collective, a network, and elders emerge over it. But we're trying to get back to that original design where it's really the church as a decentralized network, and the nodes of power keep going farther and farther out as their reproduction continues to happen.
And all that requires of us, and because everything we need to get the job done is already given to us. Well, the God's people can do this. China demonstrates that. They are uneducated people, largely. They go to scale 120 million 80 years later from 2 million. I mean, against the odds, right? I mean, that's got to teach us something. But the thing about it is, again, is this willingness to recognize and then reorganize. So recognize what we're seeing and reorganize. It reminds me of a story, a Ghanaian pastor in England. So the biggest churches in Great Britain are immigrant churches. And the African immigrant churches are huge. And they're the most dynamic, but they're first generation churches. So a number of his friends, he happened to be in a large church, a number of his friends were lamenting, oh, the church is closing, the church is closing. And they can say, oh, what are we going to do? And he says this, no, the church isn't closing. No, it's opening up in 1,000 other places, and he saw it. He said, can we see that the church is actually, this is the moment where the church can actually begin, like Jerusalem church under persecution spreads. You can't put the flame out, they just spread it. And really what we've got is like in neighborhoods now, you've got in almost every neighborhood, you've got a little church in the making. If we just saw it differently. The power is in us seeing it and naming it, legitimizing it, and then organizing ourselves to support. So it's a movement organization. So we have to learn a few things, but it's not far off. We can do this thing.
There's like one caveat that will make or break this thing. And it has to do, and we talk a lot about it. You talk about it in Forgotten Ways. Obviously, Ori's book, The Starfish and the Spider, was pretty much all about it, is unleashing leaders' heads from only one way of leading through hierarchy. And I kind of like to call it hard hierarchy. Now, we propose in the book hierarchy, but it's a different hierarchy. It's an organic hierarchy. You got to buy the book to find out what that's all about. But why is hierarchical leadership a cog, in the works?
The short answer is it's not easily reproducible and it's very expensive. It can't be easily reproduced by the average devoted disciple. So we got to be able to create church that a devoted follower of Jesus can actually operate. It doesn't need like super technicians that have done years in Harvard or in seminary, or it doesn't need that. Jesus never did need that. It's all right. They're useful. But if we're able to kind of see the church the average disciple has in them the potential for world transformation. If we could see it and organize around that, we work with what Jesus started in much more significant ways. It's only part of the answer. Rob's got the rest.
Well, we have to begin to, we've talked about Reimagined Church. If we could begin to see our churches as equipping hubs to empower ordinary people to lead simple expressions of church. And most church leaders are still on what you could call an old power model, where it's like power works like currency and it's held by a few. And then once it's gained, you sort of jealously guard it. And the powerful have this substantial store of it to spend it as they wish. And that is how most churches work. There's a handful of people, sometimes even one person, that holds most of the power, and they're designing, here's the vision, here's the programs, here's the staff. That's an old power model. The new power model, it's different. It's like current, and it's made by many. It's open, it's participatory, it's peer driven, it uploads, it distributes, it's like electricity. And when church leaders can begin to see that their job is to activate and unleash that missional currency in every single person, like my job is to help this person get to their maximum influence in terms of missionary formation, disciple making, gospel planting. Most church leaders were never trained to think that way. They were trained to be the curators of knowledge. They were trained to be the experts in the room on any topic. And we need a shift to go from this sort of managerial expertise to empowerment and equipping. And that's the big shift. I think most pastors, the bottleneck is they're still operating on that old power mindset instead of the new power mindset.
Yeah, Alan, in light of what Rob just said there, I think one of the first times I ever heard of Margaret Wheatley was probably you mentioning it, probably in conversation. And I think you may even mention her in the Forgotten Ways. Well, I know you did. So talk just real quickly about what chaotic systems, chaotic leadership is.
Okay, so Wheatley, of course, was the leadership guru. She's brilliant, and that book, I worship my way through it. I really do.
I guess D. Hawk used chaotic. Yeah. So but she still was teaching chaotic, but with other language. Yes, but anyway.
Yes, implied in what she did. So Hawk was just the more operative dude. But really, Hawk was brilliant guy. I mean, he was the founder and the CEO of Visa Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was, I think he's still alive, but he's super retired now. But he would go around to groups talk to businessmen. In fact, when he finished his role with Visa, he went into 10 years of silence. He kind of a Buddhist dude, right?
Wow.
But he took his spirituality seriously enough to go into silence and retreat. It was fascinating. He came out and wrote the book what's now called From the Many to the One. It's the birth of the chaotic age. Now, what he would say is that when you've got purpose and principle, and I would say it's like a sense of covenant relationship, and then operational principles clear, when you've got just a few of those set up, you can then, and you get, alignment around those things. And they're really more operational principles, way to do things. They create a culture. We would call them practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could then let go of command and control because people operate because it's meaningful for them. And so you have a lot of creativity in how they might apply those principles. There's no forced way in which anyone should go. So they're just following operational, so that you allow a lot of creativity. What he calls chaos is creative. Because it will be creative for us too in this moment. We will find new ways of being church. But too much of it will kill you. Too much.
And leaders don't like chaos. We like predictability. And that's what causes us to operate through command and control.
That's right. And we've now had our asses handed back to us nicely in the COVID experience, right? Now
we're getting into really the second section of the book now. I mean, we've been talking about reimagining the church as a Starfish movement. But what we're getting into now is not just any form of leadership will catalyze and sustain decentralized, networked forms of church. So what we're trying to do in this middle section of the book is get very practical for leaders, because again, most church leaders haven't had any equipping in decentralized forms of leadership. It's all been in centralized forms of leadership. And we offer a series of the entire book is a series of 7 starfish, and 4 of them are in this section that we call creating a culture of multiplying leaders. And we talk about one of the starfish, we call it the light load leader starfish. And that's how do leaders equip others in a 5-fold fashion. And we talk about 5 postures that will distribute the weight of leadership through the entire body rather than just resting on the shoulders of one person. We also hit what we call the structure starfish. This is key. And the structure starfish helps leaders rethink structure around organic systems. And we get into 5 patterns that need to be in every cell of the body. And the third big one is called the self-management starfish. Lance, you want to talk a little bit about that?
With the self-management, we've over the last 60 years, most leadership systems are based on management. In other words, people, we need someone to keep people motivated, to keep them on track, to keep them on time, make sure they're doing their job. And that's called management, which I've always felt it's interesting that the word manage starts with the word man, so that's just kind of interesting to me. Why would we want to be managed? I'd rather be driven by the Spirit and led by the Spirit. So, but it's just accepted that that's, I get womanaged, but it's just accepted that that's the way it has to be. And so under self-management, we're saying that if you have the proper systems and you have the proper agreements within your organization and in your own team, people are adults. Okay. So they, if a grown man or a grown woman was able to have a mortgage on their house, pay their bills, get in a car, drive to work, not have a wreck, work their way through the cubicles and get to their place, that's a person that's fairly competent. Okay. So they're competent enough to do their job. Why do we think people have to be managed? And so under self-management, we're saying with the systems and the agreements in place, people can do their jobs, let people do their jobs and let them self-manage. You don't have to have someone breathing over your shoulder all the time, because it even scientifically and even in neurology, it's proven that we demotivate people by managing them. And we take the joy out of work. We take the joy out of the creativity of it because we don't trust people. So we have to have trust within a self-management system. And if you hired somebody, then you ought to trust them. If you can't trust them to self-manage, they shouldn't be there in the first place. But it's become just commonplace that people have to be managed. And we don't believe that's true.
And this is, like I say, the idea of vision as the management of meaning. But this goes back to Hock's ideas. Like if you can be clear about the central ideas, why is a person there? What are they able to do? Be clear about a set of operational principles that everyone adheres to. Mm-hmm. Let them go. Let them do their thing. And they'll want to succeed like anyone else will and reward it, So yeah.
And that's right. All part of that organic hierarchy that we talk about. Is there's a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy of agreements and systems and structures that allow people to be fluid that way. So there's still hierarchy, but it's and in fact, we argue in the book that there's because people always talk about accountability. We argue that there's much more accountability in this system than in traditional systems.
It's kind of like Jesus, isn't it? Like he's still the Lord, right? He's still the master.
Kind of like Jesus is still
the servant. Yeah. He inverts
yes.
the power, right? So the greatest shall be the least. It's kind of like so yes, there is power. It's just a different type of hierarchy.
Yeah, there is. And, and that reminds me, jumping back to that first starfish, the light load leader, that's why we call it the light load leader, because Jesus said that, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. Well, if you were to ask most leaders and most pastors, do you feel like you've got a light burden right now? Most of them say, no, man, I'm worn out with this thing. And it's because we've inverted the pyramid and we are the one that's at the point with all that weight on our shoulders. And it not only should it not be, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yes. I was going to say, one of my favorite sections of the book is the what we call the collective intelligence starfish. And this is about how you begin to see your entire, let's say your church, your congregation, as a learning system, and that every single person, when you begin to look at the potential of the collaborative wisdom, skill, talent, so little of that gets tapped in the average church.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to give some very practical ways to help leaders unleash the maximum influence and wisdom of every single person that's in their influence, because that's how God designed the body to actually work. And when you strangle down the genius of the body to the gifts and the experience of a handful of people who are the leaders at the top, that means you're leaving out about 98% of the collective intelligence and wisdom that's at the table. But again, it's a shift in approach, because most leaders are still thinking, I'm NBC producing content 30 years ago, and I have to create the content for people to consume and respond to and share with others, versus no, actually right now it's Facebook. Okay, you're not a corporation anymore. Like, we have to create systems and ways for everybody to participate and be co-creators with us.
So Alan, you just in your interactions, with churches and with leaders in general over the last few years, and even over the last couple of years in particular, what shifts are you seeing that you're encouraged by in relation to some of the things that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so Lance, let me just say, I'll make just a comment quickly about what Rob was saying and come to that. Rob, it's so interesting, like, I haven't had, just on the issue of influence and leadership as influence, I don't lead an organization anywhere particularly. I'm involved, but I'm not a paid leader of any organization. But so I have no real power over anyone, none. But I have more influence now than I ever had. It's the weirdest thing. I feel it's a different kind of authority, and it feels very freeing. I'm not responsible in the bad ways to It's just been very liberating. All I'd say is it's just been wonderful to be that kind of leader.
Yes.
Just to lead by influence and not by using other levers, and not setting up organizations where it's kind of like, I so often think of Schmagel and the preciousness. It's all in the design, isn't it?
It is.
You put the precious, like if you put power at the center of the organization, then all the hands reach out to want to grab it. It's like the precious, and just don't put it there. Just don't design the organization around that principle, and you'll distribute your power, and everyone will play nicely. Because I think it's just something that should be done. But what I'm seeing, I think, when you ask the question, what am I seeing? One, I am seeing. I think the digital thing is big, and whether we like it or not, there's no one. You can't put that back in the bag. And I do think it's going to change the game. There's no normal in the standard way. I do not believe. I think people are fooling themselves, because that 50% who are barely hanging in there anyway, in the very mediocre services that we're running, if we were honest about it, wasn't that sexy, and it was hard enough to bring them in. They're not coming back. They're not. And you know why? Because
once people have experienced pajama and pancake church,
pajamas and pancake.
I'm just going to stay here and keep doing that.
Hello, they're not going to come back. Now, I'm not celebrating, but we can use that. We leverage it, for change. But the other thing I would say, so that's one thing, and I think we have to. This is a frontier. The whole digital thing is a frontier we need to learn how to engage with, and I think it's a gift. Yeah, we are in a different country to you. We can still have a real fellowship. It's not the same as we would if we were three together, but it's not bad, In fact, it's pretty good. The other thing I'm seeing hugely is and you said this to me the other day, Lance, in a text, is seeing APEST kick off in a big way. And partly because it's about the distributed intelligence that Rob was talking about, that Jesus has already put into the church.
Yes.
In his ascension, he gives the fivefold into the church as its constitutional kind of gift, and founds the church on it. And then it expresses itself in ecclesia.
And when we're talking APES, we're talking about apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher from the Ephesians 4:11 through 12 text.
And that's huge. I mean, I would say it's the most fruitful conversation globally at the moment for the missional way of thinking. And it's powerful because everyone gets in on the game. It's a much bigger and much more intelligence is brought into the equation.
And Alan, when you talk about APEST, and we all agree on this, and one of the things I've heard you say 1,000 times probably in all of our travels and everything is Ephesians 4, the biggest mistake about that people approach Ephesians as a what kind of text?
As a leadership text. So
and you're saying it's not a leadership text.
It's a ministry text. And because it says to each one of us, that's the whole church, to each one of us grace has been given. And I think that changes the game, because now you see it's all in the body of Christ. The whole body has the intelligence in it. And that's a huge game changer. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, we've tried to create a structure in the Kansas City Underground that starts with that end in mind. So we didn't plant a church when we started. A lot of people thought, Kansas City Underground, you're planting a new church. And we had to tell people over and over again, no, that's not what we're doing. We planted a mission agency, and we have 8 equipping teams. And those teams exist to help ordinary people discover their unique mission. How is it that God has gifted them? What are their unique passions? What is the Spirit telling them through their story? To whom have they been sent? And then it provides all the equipping they're going to need as they live as a missionary on a missionary pathway in a new context, planting the gospel and making new disciples. And the way we've structured is God has distributed his genius into all of his people. He has sovereignly scattered them and assigned them in our city. Our job as the mission agency is to support and equip them. So the only weekly gathering we have, it's not a weekend service. It's actually an equipping gathering for the leaders, for people who have been recognized their sentness as a missionary, or people that have made new disciples and now they're leading micro churches. And each of these equipping teams. So we have startup coaching to help people after they've got clarity on their calling, and then we have ongoing coaching. We've also got financial services, because sometimes they might need, half of our budget is grants for the missionaries and the microchurch leaders, like Capital Accelerator to help them with their mission. We've got media services. So if they need a website, or they need branding, or they need videos, but they're not making videos of me to show at a weekend somewhere. It's for the missionaries and the microchurches in their context. And what's been amazing is we have this kind of 5 phases of equipping for the missionaries. This year in COVID, it's only accelerated the work of the missionaries and the microchurches. And it's actually what you said, Alan. It's been amazing to watch the genius of Jesus. Like, I didn't figure out how to get a breakthrough in 35 different mission contexts in our city. I didn't have to, because God had already sent people there, his people, and by his Spirit, he gave them creative solutions to leverage the COVID environment to make new disciples. And it's been interesting. Like, our multiplication rate has increased. In January, we had a new microchurch emerge every single week.
Wow.
Yeah. It's so I'm someone who's like 2 years into, okay, we're trying to create this new structure, and it's been the most fun I've ever had. It's been the lightest load I've ever had. It's been the most fruitful time I've ever had. And I'm doing more of what I'm made to do, and pretending less, like I need to be all things to all people. And I just want every church leader to know the joy that we're starting to taste, Now, there's a lot of pain and suffering still involved. Don't get me wrong. I don't take a salary from the underground. So it's like, okay, that's a new world to live in.
Jesus promised that too. It's just part of the deal, isn't it?
It is. But I'm encouraged. I think there are new forms, like, Tampa, we live on their shoulders. But I'm not kidding. It's like, I feel like every month I'm meeting new networks like this that are starting to emerge in cities around America. And I do think COVID is accelerating these fresh expressions. And it's, to me, that's the most hopeful thing I'm seeing right now.
And Lance, talk to us about how, like a lot of people would say, okay, so how do you keep this from going wrong? I get it. How do you keep heresy out of the system? Or, I mean, if you've got all these people running around decentralized, how do you keep it from going off?
Well, but, the core of it all is disciple making. And I think that's, one of the things that we just don't do. What's that?
You fail there, you fail everywhere, don't you?
Yeah, because I mean, it's he said, I will build my church. Now you go make disciples. And we say, okay, Lord, I'll build you a church. And he says, no. I'll build my church. Now you go make disciples. And we say, okay, I'll go build you a church. And so, we're about the business of building churches and starting churches rather than, creating disciples. And so if we make disciples that Jesus said, who are obedient to his words and actually do what he said, I believe that's the key to it all. I think that all of us would agree with that, is that we raise up mature disciples. And the only way to do that, according to Paul in Ephesians 4, that's the key to maturity, is that text, is you got to have all of these players playing and free to play to make a mature body. And so everybody gets worried about schisms and about heresies, and all that stuff's going to come and go. But if you have a core of real disciples, they're going to filter that stuff out. They will self-filter that stuff out and be able to walk strong and work their way through it. And of course, that's what we see through the epistles. Paul was dealing with all that kind of stuff, and his whole aim was to try to raise up a mature, body that could deal with it.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I'm just going on APES.
No. Go ahead, jump in.
You think about
this is a conversation.
You have teachers given, some people who are actually quite good at kind of, clarifying truth and coaching and training and instructing. You also have the apostles who are correctors of DNA ideas. And then, of course, the prophets. If you're going to go off, if you've got genuine prophets, disciple prophets,
we need more prophets. Prophets, yes.
Yeah. Just keep you aligned, right? If you switch off the radar and you're in a plane, you're going to hit the mountainside. So you need your prophetic voice. So all five are needed to be healthy. So that, yes, you're absolutely right. If you play along the APES thing, you won't go wrong. Jesus is still Lord of his church, and he will instruct us and he will lead us in his way. We can trust that.
Yeah. Now,
well, it's also where simple organic structures come in. So like I talked about, the way we're organized, what started as one micro church here in my part of town is now up to 7. That's a formalized network now that we call collective. And then we raise up governing elders that provide hyper local oversight for that network of 7 micro churches. And then we have that ongoing coaching team. So the ongoing coaching team, every micro church leader has a coach who's a successful practitioner. So if your micro church is in our collective, you're going to have governing elders who are caring, guiding, providing oversight, and a coach from the equipping team. So I've led in large churches my whole life. We have better line of sight and much greater relational influence on our micro churches and our decentralized network than most churches do with their small groups. And Lance, what you said is true. If we build a direct dependency on the Word of God, and then we begin to help them read the Bible through a set of questions that helps them focus on the gospel, who Jesus is, their identity in Christ, and then basically hearing and obeying. It's amazing when you have a culture of discipleship in a microchurch. They're going directly to the Word of God, responding to the Holy Spirit. The Spirit and that community under the Word of God can be trusted. And if it does get off the rails, like you were saying, Alan, there's apostolic and prophetic voices that are nearby to quickly help self-correct it.
Yeah, and teachers, of course. But you can't have just 3. You have to.
That's right.
5.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we always we talk about the 3 because they've been the neglected ones, right? So, okay,
decentralized doesn't mean it's willy-nilly.
No, not at all.
It's very connected still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautifully designed, actually. You're going much closer to the original design.
Right.
Jesus built into the church.
That's the order that goes with the chaos, right? So, Okay, let's wrap it up, guys. We got to wrap this up. So just, kind of like, now we're all old guys here. We're certifiably old. Okay. Rob's the youngest, but he's getting old too. So, so, this is the time in our life where older guys start moving from what I guess Bobby Clinton or Robert Clinton was one of the first ones to say, we're moving from the drive for success to significance, which is really a happier, it is a lighter load right there. But what would it look like for the church? The church growth movement, 45, 50 years of church growth movement, which was all about success, and growth. What would it look like if the church moved to significance in these days? What would a church like that look like for you guys?
I can't take that question seriously. Look at that dude.
Now, for anyone that's listening to this podcast right now and not watching it, Rob Wagner's lack of sugar in his system is really kicking in, and he's about to go off the rails. So
I'm holding the child.
He's holding. I don't even. What is that? Yoda or
It's
something?
from The Mandalorian.
Okay, see, I've never seen Star Wars, so I wouldn't even know.
You are so old and out of it. Get out of here.
Okay.
Actually, I was making a point.
Here I am talking about significance.
It's a Mandalorian. No, it's actually a good point, actually. It's about legacy, right?
Exactly. Go, Alan. You're getting it. Keep going.
No, you've got it.
No, that's what I was going to say. It's not about an organizational chart. It's about family trees.
Yes.
And it's about seeing multiplication happen first out of your life into the life of your 12. Do you know your 12? Can you name them? Are you laying your life down for them and then helping them do the same? So now they have their 12. And then seeing the multiplication of those circles. We call them micro churches, And eventually you're multiplying disciples and leaders and micro churches and networks and hubs. And when you're multiplying at all 5 of those levels, and it's on 4 gens out, multiple strands, that's a genuine movement. And if by God's grace, I could disappear in something like that, where most of the people would never even know I was there, that would be significance for me. And that's what I'm praying the Lord will do.
It's about a family tree. And yes, exactly right. Not everyone's going to have access to you because they don't have to. If you design it into the system, all the goods are there already, and you work with Jesus in it, you don't have to have control and hierarchies, because people act because it's meaningful for them to act. And yeah, absolutely right. Relationships are really critically important. Mandalorian.
Vital.
Teach me I will.
Amen.
One closing comment. All the other Star Wars movies are about dysfunctional relationships between fathers and sons, but The Mandalorian is about a father who's willing to give up his life for his son. Isn't that good?
Hey, so was Tommy Boy.
It's the first functional father-son relationship in the Star Wars genre.
Best Chris Farley movie ever.
In a man down by the river.
It's epic. It's epic. All right. Hey, Alan, thanks for being with us.
With you. And it's a blessing. I love you both very, very much. And as the book comes close to launch, I wish you all the very, very best with it. And,
hey, we have to tell them the secret. Lance and I are going to tell them the secret. Hey, when Alan first read the book, he took us to the woodshed. He took us to the woodshed. And guess what? We ended up with a much better book.
It is so much. It totally changed.
Father who loves us. Thank you.
Yep. You did.
my pleasure.
We didn't like you at the time, but we still loved you.
And I love to hang out again, man. I tell you one thing I am missing terribly.
Miss it.
It's just because I'm introvert enough to have got a lot out of COVID, and I'm right. But gee, I'm missing just going out to a pub and being with friends. I really crave it now. Man.
Yeah.
And I do miss our times. We had, often with the two of you in different environments, but we had a lot of fun.
Yes, a lot of cumulative fun. Yeah. Well, are you? Yeah. Well, we're just praying that things will open up, man. We'll make up for lost time when it happens.
I think what we got to do is just like take a few days off and just go and party,
Yes. Yeah. No meetings. Just go do something fun. Just find a retreat and hang out with no agenda. That would be good.
The millions that you'll make on the book.
Oh yeah, we'll pay. We'll pay for it. We'll pick up the tab.
Expenses.
Not a problem.
Millions,
love you, man.
Millions of books.
I love you. I do wish you all the best.
Okay.
Let's keep in touch, and I'll see you next week. Whenever it is, the other one.
Yeah, we got stuff coming up. And hey, our podcast launched today, so and you're on some of those in the weeks that come up. So anyway,
a lot of this
intro.
First podcast is us talking about you. You might want to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Find out what we think. Okay, see you guys.
See you later, friends.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Starfish and the Church podcast today. Next week, we'll be talking with our buddy, Dave Ferguson. He's a Starfish leader of a movement called New Thing. It started with a couple of churches in Chicago, and now it includes thousands of reproducing churches working together in networks in regions all over the world. It's going to be a very interesting and honest conversation. Join us next week. Also, here's your invitation. We're gathering a launch team for our book, The Starfish and the Spirit, which releases March the 30th. Would you consider joining it? We're not asking you to join this team to promote us, but if you believe in this message, the message of servant-oriented, empowering, equipping, just bottom-up forms of leadership within the church, if you feel that we desperately need this revolution in our souls and in the church, join us in this growing community of Starfish leaders. And we want to give you a free digital copy of the book, pre-release. We're going to ask you to help us get the word out. And we're going to have a private Facebook group where we can chat, get to know each other better. We're going to do some live events where we can do Q&A and conversation with you and more. So please join us. You can look for the link in the show notes. It's also bit.ly, so it's bit.ly/launch Starfish in the Spirit. And again, thanks for listening to the Starfish in the Church podcast. We hope this has inspired and equipped you to be a Starfish leader who's reimagining church, multiplying leaders and disciples. Again, thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about the book, The Starfish in the Spirit, and other resources, head to thestarfishinthespirit.com.